When the doors of the freight car finally scraped open, not a single man moved. The German prisoners had been traveling for 9 days, crammed together in the dark, telling each other what waited on the other side. They had all heard the same stories. Barbed wire stretched across frozen ground, guard towers with spotlights that never blinked, dogs trained to chase, guards trained not to hesitate. A place built to remind them every single hour that they had lost. So when cold Canadian air rushed in and pale sunlight cut across the floor of the car, the men stayed exactly where they were. A Canadian corporal outside checked something on his clipboard without looking up. "Let's go then," he said, flat and unhurried. The way a man speaks when nothing surprises him anymore. Single file. Leave nothing behind. No rifle raised. No order barked twice. The prisoners exchanged glances the way men do when the ground shifts beneath them. Karl Brenner, a former infantry sergeant from Munich, was the third man to step down. His boots found gravel. He straightened, scanned left, scanned right. The way soldiers do before they understand a situation. He saw low barracks, a water pump, stacked timber near a shed, smoke rising slow and straight from a cookhouse chimney. Then he saw what was not there. No towers, no dogs straining at chains, no coiled wire running the perimeter, no wall of any kind. He turned a full circle just to be certain. Behind him, men were still climbing down, stopping the moment their feet hit the ground, all going still, all seeing the same impossible thing. Someone near the back of the group said it quietly in German. "There is no fence." Nobody argued. The laughter that passed through the group was thin and uncomfortable, the kind that disappears before it finishes. Because humor requires distance, and these men had none. They were standing inside the thing they were trying to laugh at. The valley opened wide around the camp. To the north, a ridge of dark spruce ran along the horizon like a pencil line. To the west, pale hills faded into low cloud. A gravel road pushed straight toward a small town whose rooftops were just visible between the trees. And in every direction between the prisoners and all of it, there was nothing. No wire, no wall. No ditch, just open ground that led wherever a man decided to go. Karl stood at the edge of the yard and stared at the road for a long moment. A prisoner beside him, a lean man from Cologne named Hess, crossed his arms and said quietly, "So we just stay because we choose to." Karl didn't answer. Hess looked at him. "That is what they are saying." Karl finally turned away from the road. "Then they are saying we have no choice worth making." That answer hung in the cold air between them. The prisoners were processed in groups. Names recorded, parcels checked, bunk assignments handed out on slips of paper. The barracks were plain and smelled of fresh-cut pine. Each man found a bunk with a folded wool blanket, a small shelf, and a nail on the post for hanging his coat. Near the entrance, a printed schedule listed meal times, work rotations, and wash hours. There was a section for medical appointments. There was nothing about rules for escape, nothing about consequences. As if the question had simply never come up. That evening they ate in a long hall. The food was plain but generous. Potato soup, dark bread, boiled cabbage, and a ladle of gravy over everything. The Germans sat close together out of habit and said very little. Men who had argued through 3 other camps over rations and sleeping space sat quietly and ate with their heads down. Karl set down his spoon and looked around the table. "Something is wrong," he said, low enough that only the men nearest him could hear. A broad-shouldered prisoner named Vogel glanced up. "The food?" "No." Karl folded his hands on the table. "The quiet. They are not afraid of us making noise because they are not afraid of us at all." Vogel chewed slowly. "Maybe they are simply organized." "Organized men still build fences," Karl said. Hess, sitting across from them, leaned forward. "I think it is the land," he said. "They know we cannot cross it. The wilderness is the fence." Karl shook his head. "Wilderness stops desperate men for a week, maybe 2. This is something else." An older prisoner at the end of the table, a schoolteacher from Dresden named Albrecht, removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly on his sleeve. Without looking up, he said, "It means they have already decided we are not dangerous enough to fear." The table went quiet. No one challenged it because no one could find the flaw in it. That night the barracks settled uneasily. Men turned on their bunks and listened to the building breathe around them. Every creak of timber sounded deliberate. Every gust of wind against the roof felt arranged. More than one man rose quietly and moved to the small window above his bunk, looked out at the moonlit ground, and stood there long enough to confirm that nothing had changed. No fence had appeared in the dark. The open land remained exactly as open as it had been at sunset. Carl was still awake near midnight when Albrecht's voice came from 2 bunks down, barely above a whisper.
You know what unsettles me most?
Carl said nothing, which was answer enough. Albrecht continued. A wall tells you what they think of you. This tells you what they think of themselves. By the end of the 2nd week, the rhythm of the camp had taken hold the way routines always do, not because the men accepted it, but because days fill themselves regardless. Work details left camp each morning in supervised groups. Timber cutting on the northern slope. Road repair along the valley floor. Unloading supply trucks behind the storage yard. Farm work on 3 properties within walking distance of the perimeter. Or rather, where the perimeter would have been. The guards moved alongside the work crews without urgency. Most carried rifles, but wore them the way a tradesman carries a tool he rarely needs. They spoke in normal voices. They waited while men rested. One of them, a young private from Ontario named Mills, had picked up a handful of German words and used them badly at every opportunity, which produced the first genuine laughter Carl had heard since the ship. One gray afternoon, Carl and 4 others were stacking cut timber behind a barn on a farm 2 miles from camp. The nearest guard had walked to the farmhouse to speak with the owner and stood with his back to the field, hands in his pockets in no apparent hurry to return. Hess set down a log and looked west. The field ran flat and open for maybe 400 yards before the tree line swallowed it. He said nothing for a moment. Then, 50 steps before he turned around. Carl kept working. I know. 100 before he called anyone. I know, Hess looked at him. You are not even tempted. It was not quite a question. Carl lifted another log and positioned it on the stack. I am tempted every time I look at an open field, he said. That is different from thinking it through. Because they had all thought it through, every man in that work crew, probably every man in the camp. Beyond the trees was a country none of them knew. In a language none of them spoke. In winter conditions none of them were equipped for. No documents, no money that meant anything. No person within 1,000 miles who would shelter a German soldier for more than 1 night, without calculating the cost. Word had already reached them about a prisoner from a separate crew who had tested the theory. He had not run. He had simply drifted sideways near a logging path and kept walking. The camp spent 2 nights constructing his escape in imagination, some placing him near the American border, others placing him face down in a frozen creek. He arrived back by truck on the 3rd day. He sat in the bed between 2 Canadian soldiers with a blanket around his shoulders and the particular expression of a man who has proven something he wished he hadn't. His boots were finished. His face was the color of old paper. He had made it as far as a general store in the nearest town before hunger defeated him. He had attempted to purchase food using coins that had not been legal tender on this continent since before the war began. The shopkeeper had fed him soup and then picked up the telephone. Every prisoner in the yard watched him climb down from the truck. They stood the way. Men stand when they expect to learn something useful from another man's suffering. The camp commandant came down the steps alone. He was a heavy-set man, unhurried in the way that authority makes certain men unhurried. He looked the returned prisoner over for a moment. Cold out there, he said. The prisoner looked at the ground. Yes, sir. Hungry? Yes, sir. The commandant turned toward the door. Feed him. Back on regular rotation in the morning. That was all. The prisoners standing in the yard were more disturbed by the mildness of it than they would have been by cruelty. Cruelty, they understood. Cruelty had a shape. This had none. That night Albrecht sat on the edge of his bunk and said to no one in particular, You understand what just happened? Several men looked at him. He folded his hands. He came back. They fed him. And now every one of us trusts this place slightly. More than we did this morning. No one spoke for a long time. Then Hess said quietly, That is the fence. By the time the snow melted and the valley turned green again, the men had stopped mentioning the fences in every conversation, but the thought never fully left. It had settled somewhere deeper than words, in the part of a man that keeps asking questions long after he has stopped speaking them aloud. Every new group that arrived by train went through the same moment. They stepped down onto Canadian soil, straightened up and looked around with sharp, searching eyes. They scanned the perimeter the way soldiers scan any unknown terrain. They found nothing to scan. And then the stillness came over them. That same frozen pause, that same expression of a man whose certainty has just been quietly removed. Years later, long after the war had closed behind him like a door, Carl would find that most of it had softened in his memory. The cold, the work, the long evenings with nothing but the sound of wind against thin walls. But the first morning remained exact. The gravel under his boots, the wide unguarded valley, the road leading out toward a town he could have walked to, and the slow, unsettling understanding that the most powerful cage he had ever been inside had no walls at all.